12 Years a Slave, the true story that still breaks my heart. When I first learned about 12 Years a Slave, I thought I was about to watch another historical drama. But I quickly realized it was something much deeper. It wasn't just a movie, it was a painful reminder that one man's nightmare was a real chapter in American history. This is the story of Solomon Northup, a man who was born free, had a loving family, and lived a peaceful life, until everything was stolen from him. Solomon Northup was born in New York in 1808. Unlike millions of African Americans living in slavery, he was a free man. He worked as a skilled carpenter and an incredibly talented violinist. He had a wife named Anne and 3 beautiful children. They weren't rich, but they were happy. Solomon believed his hard work would give his family a better future. He had no idea that his life was about to change forever. In 1841, 2 men approached Solomon with what seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime. They promised him a well-paying job as a violinist traveling with a circus to Washington, D.C. It sounded exciting, and the money would help support his family. Trusting their words, Solomon accepted the offer. After arriving in Washington, the men celebrated with Solomon and encouraged him to drink. But that drink was poisoned. When Solomon woke up, he wasn't in a hotel room anymore. He was locked inside a dark cell, chained like an animal. His kidnappers had stolen his identity and claimed he was an escaped slave named Platt. Solomon desperately tried to explain that he was a free citizen. He begged them to listen. Instead, he was beaten so brutally that he feared he would die. Every blow carried the same terrifying message. If he wanted to survive, he had to forget his real name. Soon, Solomon was shipped south on a slave ship. As he looked across the water, he knew every mile carried him farther away from his family. He didn't know if he would ever see them again. When Solomon arrived in Louisiana, he was sold at a slave auction. Families stood together praying they wouldn't be separated. Mothers cried as their children were taken from their arms. Husbands watched helplessly as their wives were sold to strangers. It wasn't simply buying and selling people, it was destroying families forever. Solomon was first purchased by William Ford, a plantation owner who treated him more kindly than many others. Ford recognized Solomon's intelligence and respected his skills. Solomon even designed a way to transport lumber more efficiently, saving Ford both time and money. But kindness couldn't erase the fact that Solomon was still a slave. He had no freedom, no rights, and no control over his own life. Eventually, Solomon was sold again, this time to Edwin Epps, one of the cruelest slave owners imaginable. Life under Epps was filled with endless suffering. From sunrise until long after sunset, enslaved people were forced to pick cotton under the burning southern sun. Every day they had impossible quotas. If they failed, they were whipped without mercy. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear became part of everyday life. Among the enslaved workers was a young woman named Patsy. Patsy was one of the hardest working people on the plantation. She picked more cotton than anyone else, yet she endured constant abuse from Edwin Epps. His obsession with her filled her life with unimaginable pain, while Epps' jealous wife cruelly attacked and humiliated her whenever she had the chance. One of the most heartbreaking moments came when Epps forced Solomon to whip Patsy. Solomon begged not to do it, but refusing meant certain death. The emotional agony on Solomon's face showed the impossible choices slavery forced upon innocent people. It wasn't only physical chains that destroyed lives, it was the psychological torture of making good people do terrible things just to stay alive. Even after years of suffering, Solomon refused to give up hope. Secretly, he searched for ways to tell someone who he really was. Several attempts failed, and trusting the wrong person nearly cost him his life. Still, he never stopped believing that one day he would return home. Finally, fate placed a Canadian carpenter named Samuel Bass on the plantation. Unlike many others, Bass openly believed slavery was morally wrong. Solomon gathered every ounce of courage he had left and shared his true story. Bass listened. More importantly, he believed him. Risking his own safety, Bass secretly mailed letters to Solomon's friends in New York. Those letters eventually reached people who remembered Solomon and knew he had disappeared years earlier. In 1853, after 12 unimaginable years in slavery, officials arrived at the plantation with proof of Solomon's identity. The moment Solomon realized he was finally free is almost impossible to describe. After 12 years of pain, fear, and hopelessness, the nightmare had finally ended. But perhaps the most emotional moment came when Solomon returned home. His children had grown into adults. His daughter had become a mother herself. The little family he left behind had spent 12 years wondering whether he was alive or dead. When Solomon embraced them again, there were no words powerful enough to capture the emotions of that reunion. It was joy mixed with heartbreak, relief mixed with sadness. They had found each other again, but they could never recover the years that slavery had stolen. After returning home, Solomon refused to remain silent. He wrote his autobiography, 12 Years a Slave, sharing every painful detail so the world would know the truth. His memoir became one of the most important first-hand accounts of American slavery ever written. It reminded people that behind every statistic was a real human being with dreams, family, and dignity. More than 160 years later, filmmaker Steve McQueen brought Solomon's story back to life in the Academy Award-winning film 12 Years a Slave. The movie introduced millions of people to Solomon's incredible courage and reminded us why history should never be forgotten. What makes Solomon Northup's story unforgettable isn't only that he survived. It's that he never allowed hatred to erase his humanity. Even after enduring unimaginable cruelty, he chose to tell the truth so future generations could learn from the past. Whenever I think about 12 Years a Slave, I don't just remember the pain. I remember the resilience of a man who refused to surrender his identity, no matter how many people tried to take it away. Solomon Northup lost 12 years of freedom, but he never lost his hope. And that's exactly why his story continues to move hearts around the world. It reminds us that freedom should never be taken for granted, that courage often appears in the darkest moments, and that one person's truth can change history forever.